be happy, but not be frivolous. And the golden mean was what he expounded in the previous chapter. And in this chapter, he's going to be giving us a very, very basic philosophy of Jewish life and the Jewish attitude to life and to living in the material world, where we are people with a body and a soul. We are here for a spiritual purpose. We're here for a higher purpose, obviously. We're not just an accident of birth. We're not just here because two cells bumped into each other in the galaxies and poof, out came a world. We believe in creation. We believe in purposeful creation, and life has a purpose, and every one of our lives has purpose and meaning. And we are here for a higher purpose, essentially. How do we correlate body and soul? How do we correlate the material and the spiritual? How do we live in a physical world and still be people with a spiritual bent and committed to a higher purpose in life? And so this is a very, very fundamental chapter in a whole Jewish philosophy of life, really. So if we go to the first halacha, he follows on what he said previously. Previously, he said that we should not engage in hedonistic, animalistic, materialistic lifestyles. So a person might say, since envy, desire, the pursuit of honor, and the like are the wrong path and drive a person from the world, which is what he said at the end of the previous chapter, then a person might say, I shall separate from them in the extreme. For example, I will not eat meat or drink wine or live in a nice house or wear nice clothing. I'll wear sackcloth and coarse wool and the like, as the pagan priests used to do. Now, it's interesting, in some of the early manuscripts of the Rambam, he didn't say pagan priests, he said Roman priests. What do you think Roman priests might mean?
Roman Catholic.
Thank you, Jared.
You're welcome.
Sounds like Jared, right?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, Roman Catholic, quite right. I don't know about Catholic, but certainly Christianity. So according to some, in the early manuscripts, it seemed like he was referring to Christianity rather than the primitive, ancient pagan priests alone. So but Catholics are more so than other denominations of Christianity, because nunneries and monasteries, I think, are more or less in the Catholic tradition rather than in other denominations. In other denominations of Christianity, the priests marry and have families. In Catholicism, they take the vow of celibacy, and therefore there are monasteries and nunneries. There's an old Yiddish proverb that Jews have no nunneries. I mean, you know, for a Catholic mother, what's true Catholic nachas if her son is a priest? For a Jewish mother, you tell her son is not going to get married and have children. That's not nachas. The biggest nachas is to take her kid to the chuppah. So the Rambam here is telling us that although he said previously that we should not get caught up in the physical, materialistic, and hedonistic or animalistic life, we should have a higher purpose in our lives. Neither should we go to the other extreme like those priests and disassociate and sequester ourselves from the world. This too is a bad path, second paragraph, and is forbidden to walk on it. Whoever follows this path is called a sinner. So you would think a person who follows this path is becoming more holy. He's becoming a tzaddik. He's renouncing the physical. He's a man of piety. Says the Rambam, on the contrary, that is sinful, that's wrong. And he brings a proof from the Nazarite. You know the story of the Nazarite, Parshas Nosai, in the beginning of the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. It says when someone takes a vow of the Nazarite that he would grow his hair and he would not drink wine for a minimum of 30 days. Like Samson, the famous Samson, the mighty hero, was a Nazarite, and when she cut his hair, he lost his strength. The prophet Samuel was a Nazarite, and so when a person takes the vow of the Nazarite, it says at the end he has to bring an atonement offering. Why is he bringing an atonement offering? For his having sinned regarding his soul. Our sages declared, if the Nazarite who abstained only from wine requires atonement, how much more so does one who abstains from everything else? So we see that the Nazarite, although he made himself more pious and more holy for a certain period, he abstained from wine and cutting his hair for that period. At the end, he brings an atonement offering, and according to one Talmudic opinion, it was somewhat sinful of him because God never said you can't cut your hair. God never said you cannot drink wine. If it's kosher, say l'chaim, gesundheit. We make kiddush on wine. We make Havdalah on wine. What's the problem? So he was going beyond. He was in a certain way abstaining from permissible things, which is not necessarily viewed as holy. In fact, why did the Nazarite do it? Rashi on the Chumash there says, it's right next to the story of the Sota, the woman accused of infidelity who met the bitter end. And when you see her degradation, you might think twice about drinking wine or going to parties. Because when adultery often starts at a party, when people have too much to drink and they get into trouble and they lose their inhibitions, and they make mistakes which could cost them their marriages and their lives. So when you see that, you might want to abstain from wine to stay out of trouble. But that's, in a sense, that's a show of weakness, and really that's not the way God intended it to be. So therefore, the Nazarite brings an atonement just for abstaining from wine and hair cutting. How much more so people are going to start abstaining from all physical things. He's not going to eat meat, and he's not going to wear normal clothes. He'll never set foot into Woolies again. I mean, what are you, Meshuggah, you know? So this general statement also refers to those who fast constantly. They're not following a good path. Our sages have forbidden a man to mortify himself by fasting. And concerning all the above, King Solomon in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, said, Al tehit tzaddik harbe, don't be such a tzaddik. Do not be overly righteous or overly clever. Why make yourself desolate? So let me say something about this. So it's not only the Catholics and monasteries and nunneries who disassociate themselves from the physical material world, but even in Eastern religions, where they seclude themselves on a mountaintop in Tibet. So for us, we are taught that we have to marry and we have to live physical lives and we have to bring children into the world, please God, and we have to live a normal life. The idea is to sanctify the material, not to escape from the material. We are not into escapism. Even a holy escapism, the Rambam says, is wrong. We have to engage with the world. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, the first line of the Torah, the Bible. Bereshis bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. The same God created heaven and earth. So the physical and the spiritual were both created by God, and God created the physical world so that we should sanctify it and elevate it and make it purposeful. If we're going to escape from it and have nothing to do with it, then what did God have to create it for? He could have just satisfied himself with the angels up in heaven, and he didn't need a physical world altogether. The whole purpose of the physical world is that we, through using it wisely and properly and in a godly way, are elevating it, and that's what it's all about. So Therefore, we don't follow the ways of the pagan priests or the Roman Catholics or the Eastern religions. We don't escape from the world. We engage with the world, which is more challenging. In a sense, it's easier to escape. You don't have the temptations. You know the story about the guy who said he conquered all his vices except one, temptation. That was a joke, man. I'd like to see some smiles here, but I only see a few people's faces. All I see is a bunch of names. I can't see if you smile at my jokes if I don't see your faces. Anyway, okay, thank you. Okay, you're there. Thank you, Jackie. All right, so the point is this, guys. It's more difficult and more challenging to engage with the world, but that's what it's all about. So escapism is not the way, even a holy escapism. Rather, we have to engage. It's a challenge, but we have to rise above it. And he's going to give us some tips on how to do that in the next few halachas. Number 2. The person should direct his heart and the totality of his behavior to one goal, becoming aware of God, blessed be He. The way he rests, rises, and speaks should all be directed to this end. For example, when involved in business dealings or while working for a wage, he should not think solely of gathering money. Rather, he should do these things so that he will be able to obtain that which the body needs: food, drink, a home, a wife. So he's reminding us that there's a higher purpose for all the material things we need in life. So, of course, we need money. It's a necessary evil. But without money, you can't do anything. You can't do a mitzvah without money. People complain that it's expensive to be Jewish. A tallis and tefillin and Jewish school fees and shul fees and what. The Rambam, thank God, is free here on this program. Baruch Hashem, you don't have to pay for this. But so many things cost money. And kosher food is so expensive, and I could save millions if I didn't keep kosher, God forbid. So we need money. But we have to understand that the money is not just to see who dies with more in the bank at the end of the day. That's just playing the rat race game. We have to ask ourselves why. What is the purpose of it all? What is the purpose of making money? What is the purpose of living a material life? There has to be a higher purpose. So therefore, when we engage the material things, eating, drinking, business, marriage, we have to understand there's a higher purpose. So similarly, when he eats, drinks, engages in intimate relations, he's not intended to do this solely for physical pleasure. So if it's only physical pleasure, he's grazing, like an animal. He'll eat and drink only that which is sweet to the palate, engage in intercourse for pleasure only. Rather, he should understand there's a higher purpose to all of these things. We should eat and drink in order for the body to be healthy. And therefore, if we're healthy, then we'll be able to serve God and make the world a better place. We should not eat only what the palate desires. Then he's like a hunt or like a donkey. If we eat just animalistically, what difference is there between the human being and the cow who's looking at the grass all day and grazing? We have to be higher people. Conversely, he should not eat what is harmful to the body, even if it's sweet to the palate. How many people get health problems because they overeat? Today they're recognizing that obesity is a huge problem. Obesity is basically because we are going after our cravings and not using our mind to control ourselves, to discipline ourselves. So here he gives some health advice, which I'm not going to go into because things change. I'm not sure if it's all the same today. Someone says it's for the commentaries tell me it's some kind of a liver disease. If somebody had a warm liver constitution, he says, for example, a person with a warm constitution shouldn't eat meat or honey or drink wine. As King Solomon said in Proverbs, one should drink endive juice, even though it be bitter. because then it's healthy for you. So basically, he's telling you to eat healthily. Next paragraph, similarly, he should not have intercourse except to keep his body healthy and to preserve the human race for reproduction purposes. The halacha is that if you're married, it's a kosher marriage, and you have a Jewish wife, and you had a chuppah and kedushin, you're allowed to engage in intimacy. That's not a problem. And in fact, you have obligations to satisfy your spouse. But it should be with limitations. We shouldn't be animalistic in that area of life either. For example, he says sometimes you need it more for health reasons and also obviously for reproduction. So we should understand that whether it's food or it's physical intimacy, there is a deeper purpose and higher reason for these things, which we should not forget. Number 3, a person who accustoms himself to live by the rules of medicine does not follow a proper path if his sole intention is just that he should be healthy. And he'll have children, and his children will look after him. That's also not just to be healthy for health's sake and for your own sake, also wrong. So he says rather, one should intend to have a son with the hope that perhaps he'll be a wise and great man. Okay. Thus, whoever walks in such a path all his days will be serving God constantly, even in the midst of his business. And even during intercourse, because his higher purpose in all of the above is to fulfill his needs so that his body be whole to serve God. Even when he sleeps, if he retires with the intention that his mind and body rest so that next day he can get up and serve God meaningfully, then his sleep is also meaningful. In fact, the Rambam, you learned the Rambam previously. How many hours did the Rambam say you should sleep? Do you remember? Didn't you learn that yet? I think you learned that already. No? I think maybe it's still coming. I'm not sure. The Rambam writes that you should sleep ideally 8 hours a night, not a day, a night. I don't know how many people get 8 hours. I must be honest. I'm getting much more sleep in lockdown than I ever used to before. I used to get up at 6 o'clock to get to shul for the 7 o'clock minyan. Now there's no 7 o'clock minyan, so I don't set the alarm for 6 o'clock anymore. So man, I'm actually keeping to the Rambam more these days than I ever did in my life. But the point he's making is that if you have a higher purpose in your life, then all the physical material things you do, eating, drinking, sleeping, intimacy, is all for that higher purpose. So it becomes endowed with sanctity, with godliness. Business, making business so that you can pay for your children's Jewish day school fees, so you can pay the shul their shul fees, so you can make a donation to tzedakah, so you can help the people who are suffering now during COVID. Those are all higher goals and higher paths. So if you do that, then everything you do, even your sleeping, is in the service of God. Last paragraph on this matter, our sages have said, he quotes Proverbs, King Solomon again, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. In the Hebrew, he says, V'chol ma'asecha l'shem shamayim. Have you heard that expression? L'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. That what I'm doing now is for the sake of heaven. I'm doing a material, physical act. I'm doing business. I'm working for a living. I'm eating, I'm drinking, I'm sleeping, I'm being intimate, whatever it is. It's a physical thing. But I have a higher purpose in mind. It's l'shem shamayim. It's for a higher purpose, for the sake of heaven. This is what King Solomon declared in his wisdom, Bechol drochecho do'ehu. Know him, know God in all your ways, and he will straighten your paths. In all your ways, even your physical, material ways and paths in life, if you know him, then in fact, you are close to Hashem, and he will straighten your path. So whether it's eating, sleeping, or business, if they are all endowed with a higher purpose, a meaningful, then our lives become meaningful and purposeful and godly. So he spoke before about having kids who will look after you, or a better thing, having a kid that you should hope perhaps will become a wise and great man in Israel. I remember years ago, I had a woman who called me that she became pregnant, but it was not her intention to become pregnant. She was married. It was a kosher child, but she was not looking to have any more children. And she did not feel she could handle another child, and she called me with a halachic question about having an abortion. Now, we're not discussing abortion here, but I'm just going to tell you a story which is related to this idea of having a son who will perhaps be a wise and great man in Israel. So it was a complicated question because generally speaking, briefly, I'm not going to give a whole share on abortion now, but briefly, the Jewish law is that abortion is permitted only if it's to save the life of the mother, physically, medically, or sometimes psychologically, if the person will, God forbid, have a nervous breakdown or something, she won't be able to handle it emotionally, then it could also be, but you have to ask a shaila, you have to ask a rabbi, you shouldn't make, it's a very big decision to end a life or potential life. So anyway, it was a complicated case, and I called a very respected rabbi in Canada who I knew and I trusted his guidance and answers. So I called him for help with this question. I didn't want to take it on my own shoulders. It was many years ago. So listen what he said to me. He said, before I answer the question halachically, go back to this woman and tell her, what if I told you that that little fetus inside of you is going to be Mashiach? What would your attitude be? Unfortunately, it didn't help, and she had the abortion. So I hope he wasn't Mashiach, because that would have really set us back. But anyway, the point is, you never know. So the bottom line is that we are to engage with the world. We are not to disassociate ourselves from the world. We don't have to be in a monastery. We don't have to be in a mountaintop. We should live normal lives, engage with the material world. You could enjoy life. You could have good food and good wine, but remember that it's all for a higher purpose. Remember that we are here. Our birth is not an accident, and therefore we have a job to do. God put us here for a purpose. What I can do, you can't do. What you can do, I cannot do. Each one of us has a unique sphere of influence and potential in this world. That's why God needed 7 billion people or so, because everybody's unique, right? I'm unique. You're unique. We're all unique. Nobody has the same fingerprints. Nobody has the same purpose in life. And therefore, in order to succeed, we need to be healthy. So we shouldn't go to extremes and live a life of asceticism where we don't eat, we don't sleep, we just fast, and that's not being wise or so pious. We don't have to be so pious. Obviously, we try and fulfill mitzvahs in the best possible way. We try and when it says don't be such a tzaddik, it means don't go to extremes. We do try and be a tzaddik. We try and be as righteous as we can, We try and do a mitzvah in the best possible way. We take precaution. The rabbis have made many decrees and precautionary laws to help us not make a mistake with the basic law, but we're not changing the law. We mustn't add to the Torah, and we mustn't go to extremes. So when we live a normal, physical, healthy life, but it's endowed with a higher purpose, then all our material engagements in this world, food and business and intimacy, will all be endowed with that higher godly purpose. Please God, we should be successful. Now, I'll just end with one idea I like to say. It's a question of balance. Like the Rambam said in the previous chapters, to be balanced, to go the middle road. The trouble is that each one of us have decided that we worked out punct exact the middle road that's perfect. Yeah. Every one of us thinks that we have just the right balance. It's a funny thing. Everyone. I think I got the right balance. You think you got the right balance. Everybody thinks they got the perfect balance, and anybody to the right of me is a religious fanatic. Anybody to the left of me is a goy. That's just a cute observation that how we all think that we have the perfect balance. But we have to be objective, not subjective about this. And we have to, that learning the Rambam tells us what's right and what's wrong. So we know what the right balance is. Okay, that's all from me. If anybody has any questions or comments, the floor is open.
What about Rabbi Tzadok?
Which Rabbi Tzadok you're referring to?
The one from the Gemara, the one who fasted 40 years to prevent the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed. Was he right to do that?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Jared asks. We learned that actually. Did you learn that on Tisha B'Av?
Well, I've known it for a while.
So that's one of the Gemaras you're actually allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. So I didn't do it this year,
Okay.
but many times on Tisha B'Av I learned that Gemara. And it tells the story of Rabbi Tzadok who fasted for 40 years because he saw that the temple was in danger of being destroyed by the Romans, which indeed it was. And he fasted for 40 years. Obviously, he ate something at night. When at the end of it, it says how they healed him. He was probably like a concentration camp survivor at the end. But Jared asked a good point. Is that the way? So the truth is that is not the norm. There's no question that is not the norm. And there were many rabbis around at that time. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the greatest rabbinic leader and hero of that whole episode, as the same passage in the Talmud tells us, that he was able to rebuild the Torah and the Jewish community in Yavne after the fall of the Second Temple. And he was the one who got the Romans to heal Rabbi Tzadok from his 40-year fast. But in his case, I think, I don't think he's criticized. He's admired for his extreme piety. But it's certainly not something that is expected of the average person. And I'm sure if he asked the rabbi, should he do it, they would say no. So he went beyond the call of duty. But he also did it for a different reason, and that was to try and stop the destruction of the temple. The Rambam's not talking about such an extreme case. The Rambam's talking about the average person should not go around fasting his whole life. Although the Jewish teachers of Musar do teach us that now and then we could observe some fasting to do penance for our sins. But today we are discouraged from fasting and rather to give tzedakah. Obviously, Yom Kippur you have to fast, Tisha B'Av you have to fast, but extra optional fast that a person would take upon himself for penance, for atonement for his sins, that was something that was done in the old days. Today, the rabbis discourage us from doing that because we're not as healthy maybe. And today they encourage us rather to give tzedakah in lieu of a fast. How do you give tzedakah in lieu of a fast? You work out how much would two or three meals a day cost you. And you give that amount that it would cost you for the meals to the tzedakah of your choice. I see another hand up. Kent, were you on one? No? Any other questions, comments, rebuttals? Feel free. Okay,
Good food for thought.
been nice
Shabbat, Rabbi.
time with you guys.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rabbi.
Shabbat.
Shkoyach, that's,
Thank you very much, Shabbat.
and nice to have you, and we'll see you again next week, but I hope you'll carry on with my colleagues every day.
Ja, thank you.
God bless you all. I'm ending
Bye-bye.
the Sei gesund.
Ja.